we are not in control of the places we call home. It is determined by the social, cultural, and political situation where the rulers of the country, politicians, architects, and anything in between make the decisions for us. Intertwined in history, public housing in Singapore has developed since the days of the kampongs, or rural villages. Within such villages, there was a sense of the kampong spirit, where people of various walks of life got together for various communal activities, and where no one was left alone. Nonetheless, it was not perfect. 16,000 victims of the Bukit Ho Swee fire spurred change, giving our colonial rulers opportunity to label such villages as unsanitary, congested, and dangerous. As kampongs were haphazardly built, there was no control over them, therefore existing as the opposite of modernity and the vision of Singapore, shoved aside and discarded. The first public housing system therefore came to be. Tiong Bahru was an estate that was built by the Singapore Improvement Trust, led by the British, seeking to provide better housing conditions for the people of Kampong Tiong Bahru. Residents were split into individual floors and units, creating segregation. However, many residents left items on the corridor, and there was a sense of interaction as neighbors got to know one another through daily objects. Gated doors offered security while still allowing visibility into public spaces. Coffee shops, or kopitiams, were introduced on the first story, serving as spaces for people to bond through food. There was initial inertia when the flats were first completed. The estate became an area where rich men kept their mistresses, as the rent was expensive. Upper story flats cost 22 Singapore dollars a month, compared to the average working class, which earned 15. After the British left, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew set out to provide housing for a wider population and set up the Housing Development Board, HDB, a government-run statutory board and authority that designs, sells, and offers schemes relating to public housing in Singapore. These are public housing typologies based off of our colonial legacy, but with our own twist. The void deck was added in an attempt to unite communities through public spaces. However, little to no people use them. A 99-year leasehold was introduced in 1964 to allow residents to own their own homes. The gates were still kept, and windows on the corridor allowed one to interact with neighbors inside of the house. As public housing becomes a game of numbers today, the extent of austerity and care become difficult to quantify and balance. Stakeholders seek to care for everyone, providing more for the population, introducing schemes to maintain the interior of homes every 30 years and to paint the exteriors every 7 years. Caring for the buildings also means caring for its residents, with elderly or accessible features being installed to be more inclusive towards the diversity that HDBs provide for. However, the flats themselves are provided with austerity, at the expense of the wants of residents to align with budgets, environmental guidelines, and efficiency. In developed city-states like Singapore, residents tend to then expect more from their homes. Today, land scarcity in an ever-growing city drives housing prices despite the ever-shrinking square foot areas. Air conditioning is an important necessity today as temperatures rise near the equator. Corridors that used to promote community are no longer seen as practical, adding to homeowners' cooling costs and moving all the objects of personality into the homes. Many also choose to make do and redesign their homes, knocking down walls and generating more waste in a situation where it seems as though there is no alternative. Neighbors then shut their doors in the name of privacy, away in their own oasis of a home. With the need to define every space, labeling them with specific functions, we have deconstructed communities and the blurred lines of shared spaces, promoting such communities. Places of bonding are now dispersed into community centers where residents congregate. These interactions are, however, no longer sporadic or invitational. What was once a graveyard has now become prime estate, where numbers ultimately make the decisions. The most common use of void decks today are for funerals, Chinese ones specifically. This attempt at communal space not only serves as a place to celebrate death. With more voices and viewpoints changing our housing system, how can we balance architectures of care with costs and budgets to determine what is worth building? Have our communities, as a result, been segregated in this strive for balance?